I appreciate it is early in the morning on Friday on the last day of the conference, so whilst I've no doubt there are many reasons you're all going to hear, I'm going to assume it's just for this presentation because it makes me feel much better. So thank you very much for coming and taking your time out of the morning to listen to my talk this morning. It is a little bit of a personal journey. It's about what I've learned as well as what my team have learned. I hope that through this you find it useful. Welcome to those who are just arriving. Please do take a seat. Now let's see if I can make this work. There we are. So, firstly, welcome to Jersey. Anyone know where Jersey is? A few people. Great. Okay, how many of you think it's a state in America? Okay, there's a really good history lesson. I'm just waiting to share with you all about that, but not today. So Jersey is in the Channel, so between France and the UK. You can see actually where the giant yellow red dot is up there. That's Jersey. The picture there, by the way, is Jersey. Now, last night I had a fascinating evening, and one of the things that was being discussed is whether, in fact, it is the Philippines or the Bahamas that has the best beaches. So I'm just going to ask you to look at this photo and tell me which one is it, because personally, I am voting for, I'm very sorry, I am voting for Jersey. Is that okay? I'm voting for Jersey for a reason, which is there's one thing about Jersey that neither the Philippines, the Bahamas, nor anyone else can lay claim to, which is that it is the warmest and sunniest place in the British Isles. Okay, I get that you're laughing because that's a bit like saying it's the top shelf in the freezer, isn't it, for many of you? I do understand. But trust me, it's really not such a bad place. And you're all very welcome to visit. What we are, though, is we're a very small community. So we're about 100,000, and we have all the infrastructure that you would have with a nation state. We have what's called a crown dependency. We have our own independent parliament, courts, everything. So when we look at this, we're looking at this from a point of view of how do we stand up the sort of structures, capabilities that a large country might have, but to do so at small scale. And if you want to know more about that, I can't talk too much about that today, but I do not need to, because one of my colleagues has done so already, and I will tell you about his presentation as well. So in Jersey, this is Jersey Cybersecurity Centre. We were founded in 2021 when I joined as the first director. We became Jersey Cybersecurity Centre in 2023, when of course people realised that incident response was best done by preventing the incident from happening in the first place, every opportunity you possibly can. So really, how can we focus on prevention as well? And we have a cybersecurity law coming out that will give us the basis for our operations. So a bit about Jersey Cybersecurity Centre, but what really makes Jersey Cybersecurity special, of course, we became members of FIRST this week. So that's fantastic news. Thank you very much. Round of applause for my team, yeah. And I have one of my team in the audience. Paul is here as well, so you're all very welcome to talk to Paul as well. In fact, I think almost all of you have already spoken to Paul as well, so that's fantastic. So that's our team. Now, I mentioned that I wasn't the first person from JCSC to talk about these sorts of topics. So we've been looking at this really since we were set up. Because of that small scale that we have, we really have to think about how we work and how we cooperate with other organisations, with other bodies, with industry, with government to try and make things work. And Paul, my colleague Paul, is sat here at the front. He spoke at Fukuoka on building a national CSIRT at a nano scale. We're still waiting to come up with smaller jurisdictions who can lay claim to that fame. There might be one somewhere, but we've not found it. James, my colleague James, who some of you will know, spoke earlier this year on aligning incident response with emergency response using JESIP. So he did a bit of a talk, and actually this very much builds on what Paul and James have spoken about previously. So at the end of this, I will provide a link so you can look at their presentations too. The final one is me. Hopefully I don't need to tell you what that talk is because you're all here. Do tell me if I do. So, a little bit of history. You'll all know these frameworks. I've just put them up there because you all know them. Wow, that's a lot of people taking photos. I'm really genuinely surprised. I thought, okay, if there's one thing that's going to not surprise people, it's going to be reference to NIST incident management frameworks. And the reason for that, of course, is I've been using these for a couple of decades. My background is not in national emergency response, it is as a corporate CISO. So most of my career I have spent in banks, in financial services institutions, trying to improve their security, build the right frameworks, and of course, as part of that, sometimes you get involved in incidents. And I will be honest with you, the first time I actually got involved with an incident, it was a surprise because that was in the day when incidents did not happen every day. I think that time is really largely gone, but dealing with some of the early stuff. So some of the stuff that I've dealt with existing incident management frameworks for cybersecurity, right back to things like, well, it's just right back really, there are people who have a longer history than me, things like Configure worms and stuff like that, back in the early 2000s. But also we've used these frameworks quite successfully to manage some quite large incidents. The largest one I did, I think, was about 120 countries across 24/7 response over several days. And these frameworks, they do work. Yeah? They talk about the key steps in incident management. We're all familiar with them. They're great. So why would we need to apply anything else to it beyond these and the tools that we already have? Well, there are some limitations to them. They're very well intentioned. I've just picked a few of these up just to explain. So, for example, ISO, really clear. It talks about incident management as being collaborative activities to handle information security incidents in a consistent way. Not just handling an incident, collaboration and consistency. Really important points. And actually, they resonate through all of them. NIST talked about some of the limitations in the existing approaches, so the focus being around central and distributed CSIRTs, not coordinating teams. And of course, what I'm doing today is very much more of a coordinating team. And it's an intentional limitation. Yeah, and it's absolutely fine, but it is a limitation. So I looked a bit more beyond this. Where else is there? Various people do some work. Not surprised, Carnegie Mellon pops up here, various documents, and they have looked to that external coordination. But even then, a lot of the focus is on how do we do things within an organization. It's the biggest issue. Yeah? How do we make our organization respond to us? So there may be some limitations in these frameworks that we've been using. And I think if I look back at my career, that may have limited and restricted our approach and our effectiveness when we are coordinating with other bodies. Now, that might be governments, but it can also be suppliers. Or if you have a holding company with a lot of independent subsidiaries, it's kind of like being a national CSIRT because you're basically a coordination body and you have quite limited control. So there's lots of applicability. So, is there an issue there? I think there might be. Yeah, we've got these international standards and frameworks. They are great. They are really good. They're really good for encouraging information sharing. But they're less helpful when you need to cooperate, make decisions across multiple organizations. I don't just mean information sharing. I don't mean saying we had this incident, here you are, we'll tell you about this later, let's talk about this. I mean, when you really want to say, actually, we've got to work together to respond to this. And today, with integrated supply chains, of course, that's more of a challenge than it was before. So maybe it's not quite enough. So then I thought, okay, we've got this new role. We've got to understand how do we take this legacy experience, understanding and knowledge that I've built up over a couple of decades that my team coming in also have built up and apply this in a really different environment. And this is an environment where rather than being able to issue an instruction, yeah, there's no CEO who says use the whole resources of the island. Yeah, that doesn't happen. Yeah, they can't do that. They're independent companies and organizations. We have to work out how we do this through influence and cooperation. So we built some structures, and hopefully everybody now recognizes the Ukraine flag. I think in 2021, not so many people would have recognized the Ukraine flag. I think that incident by itself, obviously, our involvement as a small island is nothing compared to what's happened in the rest of the world. And I'm not going to claim for a minute that it is. What I am going to tell you is that we learned a lot from our involvement in this response. And the reason we learned a lot was because when this happened as a global shock, which is what it was, we realized that we had to think about our own impacts in our own jurisdiction. I'm sure many of you will have felt similarly. And as soon as we did that, we realized actually, there is a cyber element to this. there could be a cyber element, there is a cyber element, there will be a cyber element, it's a little unclear. Yeah? But also there are other elements to this. There's a humanitarian element. There's a sanctions and financial services element. There are lots and lots of different parts that come into play here that we need to look at. So what you need to do is you need to be able to coordinate. So I still remember sending an email to our emergency planner saying, you know what, this has happened. Would it be a good idea if we had a meeting and discussed a bit? And of course, the response was, yes, absolutely it would. And we've already thought about this. And here's our structure, here's our processes, here's how we are going to respond collaboratively together. I'm like, hold on a second, this isn't even necessarily a major incident yet. But of course, they were in that space, they were ready, they were responding. And we have these structures. So if you think back to COVID-19 and you're listening to advice from scientists, we had a similar structure, Cyber Technical Advice Cell, which was like our scientific technical advice cell, and it was just about applying those lessons in cyber. And we brought together everybody. So yes, our CSIRT, but also government, telecoms, electric, law enforcement, ports and so on, all together in a room to say, how do we actually bring together the necessary expertise to understand what might happen here in our jurisdiction? And we did that for quite a while, actually. We met regularly until we realized this was actually becoming a chronic issue. And that falls into our response structures. And because of that, it gives us visibility up to the top level of national emergency response. The nice thing about that is it is coordinated. We are working with them. The downside of it is it's a whole language that I just didn't understand. We are not familiar with, we have not used before. Yeah? And that really surprised me. How is it that actually in cybersecurity, we have all these frameworks, tools, capabilities that we use all the time, and yet as soon as we transition into emergency management, actually it's all slightly alien to us. Surely these guys have something to teach us. Surely in life and death situations, they have something that we can learn in cybersecurity. Fortunately, had the opportunity to learn from this a little bit further. Now, Jersey is a small place. Yeah? One of the nice things about being a small place, not normally in the middle of major international disputes, conflicts, etc., is that sometimes not a lot happens. Yeah? Now, could be good or bad, but in the context of incidents, generally that's a good thing. Unfortunately, over the last few years, Jersey's had a number of incidents to deal with which have been quite critical. So things like, obviously starting with COVID, moving into the war in Ukraine I mentioned, but also there was a major gas explosion, cost 10 lives in the community, which is quite a lot for a small community like ours, maritime accident. So our emergency services are now quite planned. Yeah, they are quite prepared, and they've worked through a lot of this. And on the 29th of October 2023, we heard that there was going to be a storm hit Jersey. The interesting thing about this is what I was due to do on the 31st of October was to sit down with the police, with the ambulance service, with the fire service, with the government, and talk about how we practice emergency management. Now, if you want to co-locate people in a crisis, I can tell you the best place to start is with a crisis response exercise at exactly the same time, because it pivoted seamlessly and immediately into a coordinated response to this storm. Yeah, and fascinating to see that at play. Yeah, so we had a meeting in that room. You had all the necessary authorities feeding in, you know, weather forecasts, etc., police, ambulance, working out what they're going to do, government communications, all of these different people coming in at the very early days. And it occurred to me actually, as a CISO in my previous role, would I have had that input? I would not have had that input. It would be towards the end of the process that I would talk to my corporate comms team most likely. How do we communicate this incident out? Yeah. So we knew that this was going to happen. It did hit. Yeah. It became quite a significant event. So I don't know if you felt an 8.5 centimetre hailstone. I personally have not, but some of our fellow islanders have. I think the hailstones I felt like 8.5 centimetres, but really weren't when I went out to tie down my outside furniture in the middle of the storm. Probably a bad idea, but they were quite significant. And it became one of the largest in the British Isles, depending on how you look at the stats, possibly since the 1950s. So very powerful tornado that ripped the roofs off buildings, destroyed houses and left people displaced. But what was interesting to me was how efficiently a coordinated response was launched that did everything at the time when you would expect it to be done. Thinking through not just what's happening now within a technical context, in this case meteorology rather than cyber, but also in terms of the practical impacts around us. Really a very impressive approach to go. And of course, that's because we've been learning from existing frameworks, but not cyber incident response ones. So why did it work? And a lot of it came down to this. JSIP. Anyone familiar with JSIP? 1, 2, okay, a few, yes, okay, a few people, most of whom I've spoken to actually this week, yeah. JSIP is a UK doctrine. Now, I should add, other countries also have their own approaches. This is not by any means the only one, but it is a really interesting case study to pick and ask ourselves the questions, what can we learn in cyber? So it brings together a few different things, some principles for joint working. So thinking outside the organisation rather than within it. A joint decision model. No, I never really did that. I did a lot of information sharing in my career. Yeah? We never really sat down with suppliers and customers and said, how do we make this decision together? Yeah? Shared situational awareness. Now, I don't think I ever really had that in a corporate environment. We tried, but a lot of it is sort of asynchronous communications. It happens afterwards. Do you really build a shared understanding of that picture? You, organisation above you, your board, your colleagues, subsidiaries, whatever else it is. And I've called this last one standardized record keeping, but it's not really right. It's more about having a standardized approach to documentation and information sharing more than anything else. So a framework that provides really good documentation. How do you do a briefing? How do you write up notes? How do you share that information? And the key thing here is this, interoperability. And the whole focus of this isn't on technical response, it is solely on how you work together. Now, when I go back and I take that definition there, interoperability, and say, is that applied? How is that applied in the cyber incident management frameworks that we use? The answer is, it's kind of there in places, but it's not really visible. We talk about information sharing, not working together. We'll talk about informing people of decisions and what we did rather than making them together. So really interesting focus. So a little bit about this. Now, what you can see if you look at these are the principles for joint working. One thing that may jump out at you is, well, hold on, these don't seem to translate directly to cyber. And this is also something my colleague James spoke about earlier in the year, because it turns out they really do. So if we take co-location as an example, the example I gave you was a brilliant example of co-location almost by accident. Yeah, can be physically all in the same room. But what if it was a cyber crisis? Would we want to be all in the same room? Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going to be most effective at mounting a cyber response if I am in my own operations centre. Don't know what you think about that, Paul? Same place? Yeah, same place. He'd like to be there, yeah? Now, government would like to be in their own operations centre, the police, fire, etc. Similarly, UK authorities, we work closely with the UK, likely the same. We're 12 miles from France. French authorities, they're not going to come across to our island if we have to work together. So actually co-location doesn't work in the same way, but it does work, because that can be virtual. It can be about, are we all ready to work together in the same way, in the same place, whether it is Teams, assuming that is still working, or even the telephone or backup emergency communications. How do you bring everybody together? Communication isn't the end here. It's right at the beginning. It says right at the start, how do we communicate? If you think about those frameworks I put up before, communication is embedded in those, but it's definitely not right up front. The biggest lesson I learned as a corporate CISO is when I realized that if I wanted my board to leave me alone, I had to tell them and communicate with them clearly and say, we will update you in 24 hours, or we will update you in 60 minutes. Yeah, actually, communication's right at the top. Coordination, yeah. Again, very often what we do is we jump into our response and we say, okay, we've got to manage this incident. Do we think about how we need to coordinate with the rest of the organisation, customers, suppliers, and others? Yeah. So you have a whole load of issues here, and they're all very carefully considered. Jointly understand risk. Yeah. It sounds obvious, doesn't it? But I'm not sure I ever really did that properly. Yeah. So how do we use those? It provides a joint decision model. Yeah? And this asks some really interesting questions. I never remember consciously asking myself the question, have I considered the powers that I actually have to resolve this incident. They're very often granted or not granted. But by considering them, by asking this question, this is a cycle, it really helps you do that. And it also provides focus. So right in the middle, what does it say? Saving lives, reducing harm. Now, any incident, a major cyber incident, the ones we really, really care about are the ones that affect people. Yeah? That focus, very easy to lose. It's a really useful model. Shared situational awareness. Yeah? Do we know what's happening? Is it a major incident? How are we going to respond to it? And again, you can say, well, hold on a second, maybe some of these don't apply. What about hazards? Hazards, physical hazard is really clear, yeah? I have a physical hazard right here. I'm really trying not to move sideways, trip over it, yeah? In an instant, that's clear. What about in IT? I think anyone here who's in incident response, and we are all in incident response, will have found themselves in a situation where doing something has its own price. You know, what is it that we could cause that could make the situation worse? All of these apply. Yeah. Standardized record keeping, this is just about, there's an app, it's a brilliant app, so I can go on the app, I can pick up my phone, I can go on the app, I can record the notes, I can use this framework. It's a great idea. Yeah. But also, briefings, meeting notes are all the same. Yeah, I've used this before. In fact, a little while ago, we had 3 incidents in one day, 3 incidents actually in 90 minutes. And in the course of that, I took all of those calls and managed to send one of my colleagues to the wrong location. If I'd been really clear about making sure what I was documenting, what I knew, yeah, I could have saved him. Now, fortunately, it's a small island, so it's a 10-minute walk. And it's kind of amusing making them run. No, it's not, I'm joking. But getting this right really helps. Yeah. So the next thing is, okay, for cyber incidents, existing frameworks work. But for hybrid incidents, where we need to cooperate with others for the well-being or lives of the population, it really matters that we look at these things. Fortunately, the lessons are actually fairly well known. So, very briefly, Pollock report looked at the application of JSIP across the UK, and it looked at all these different incidents. And in it, they did this little matrix where they said which of these 4 key areas apply as a lessons learned in each of these incidents. And then they realized they were kind of wasting their time because all of these were lessons learned in each of these incidents. Yeah, how well are you organized? Does everybody understand? Do the communications work? Shared situational awareness? Do our exercises work? Does the right training work? Every single incident they looked at, there were learnings in these areas that would have changed or improved the outcome or the management of the incident. And I think these are ones that we can apply to. Manchester Arena bombing. Now, I was in Manchester a few weeks ago for Cyber UK NCSC's conference, which kind of reminded me very much of this particular incident. Now, this was very sad because it was teenagers going to a pop concert, Ariana Grande. I've never heard Ariana Grande, at least not in a pop concert, but I'm told that teenagers think she's absolutely ace. So 21,000 packing out a stadium. And of course, that was when a terrorist decided to bomb it, and 22 lives were lost, including an 8-year-old girl. Very, very sad incident. But actually, the themes that come out of that, the lessons learned from something like that, it's really hard to criticize when people are responding under that type of pressure. The themes are very similar. Yeah? How do you command? Who controls? What are the communications? Does it work? The shared situational awareness, does it work? Training and exercising, they had a plan. Yeah? It took them a couple of hours to actually say, we're going to implement this plan. Yeah? Lessons learned from real life situations that apply to these frameworks. Yeah? So, what I'd like to do is just talk for a moment about some of the challenges that this brings. Yeah? We do already have some great tools and frameworks. Yeah, I was just saying at the beginning of this, when I was young and junior in my career, I looked at all the existing frameworks. I thought, how awful are all of these? None of them work, etc. And then I met some of the brilliant people, some of them in this room, who actually wrote some of those. Yeah, and actually, you know what? They are very good frameworks. They are just not perfect for every case, and they're never going to be. Yeah, and that's fine. So this is not about criticizing existing frameworks. It's about saying how can we learn and apply some of this from outside of cyber. And we learn from emergency services. Lots of people have gold, silver, bronze command structures and so on. But we're not so good at real-time coordination and shared decision-making. Even within an organization, it's difficult. More widely, it's really hard. Yeah, and in the sorts of hybrid risks that we see today, it's becoming only more important. Yeah? So multi-agency collaboration, it's much harder to do than within, and we have to learn from that. You know, if you look at those lessons from the Pollock report that I mentioned earlier, how much of those are applied in existing frameworks? It's a really interesting question. Some of them well, some of them not so much. And the structured implementation, JFSC works because it gives you clear standards of documentation, of behavior, of briefing, so you're being consistent. Whereas we stop very often at the high-level standards, and I have not seen, you can tell me I am wrong, standardized minutes, agendas in the way that work within JFSC. And I think maybe that's an interesting point for our community. Yeah? And language and approaches. Yeah? Never realized how important this was. Yeah, until you go into a room and they're talking about logists or whatever it is. No, I never had a logist. Yeah, we just wrote down records in the management system. Yeah, different sets of languages and behaviors. And when you have different sets of languages, different language, different behaviors, different ways of talking about an issue, you can often find yourselves talking about different things. Yeah, and then you don't lose that sense of shared awareness, that sense of shared decision making. So how do we bring together those decisions? Yeah. And finally then, where could we take this forward? How could we take this forward? Does this apply? Is this something that we should look at within our organisations altogether? Now, when my colleague James spoke in January, he put forward a few ideas. He said, well, could we have a sort of cyber JSIP? That's one thing we've been evaluating. The answer is, well, no, that's kind of a bit mad, isn't it, to try and create a sort of broken version that's just for cyber when the goal is to bring things together. Could you cherry pick the best ideas and say, is there something that we can learn from there? And maybe, I guess you could. Yeah, and that might be helpful, and I think we do a bit of that. Or could you find a way to align them? Could you find a way to bring together the strengths of cyber incident response and the strengths of physical emergency management, bring them together so that you can have a really effective collaborative answer? And that's really critical for us. We're really small. We have a small team. If we have a major incident, we are going to need to depend on them. The ability to share resources is absolutely essential. And I think that's the case for most, actually. Even if you have a large company, how big is your CSIRT? Yeah, it is generally not the largest team. Most it's the sales team, I think, occasionally engineering, some companies, unfortunately, legal, but we'll leave those to one side. Very rarely the CSIRT, yes? So we're all dealing with limited resources, and if we can find better ways to collaborate and share, can we draw on the resources within our organisations, outside our organisations, across the public sector better? And when we have an incident that really affects well-being, that really affects our customers, their lives, the way they live, that really affects occasionally life and death, how do we share and how do we collaborate? And are we in a position where we could if we needed to? So they're really good questions. We could use these tools to enhance cooperation, improve outcomes within our organisations and outside them. Yeah. Could we look at international approaches to this? It's very different. I mentioned this is the UK. Different European countries have other approaches. I'd love to hear about ones that exist elsewhere. Could we look at this internationally? And then it occurred to me, if we were looking at things internationally, which better community to look at it than actually the experts that are here at first? So that's my question to myself. What can we do to apply these lessons, to apply them in the way we work, and also as a community, what can we do? And actually the final one, and in many ways I think the most important, is there something that we can do that is a bit more granular than the templates, than the standards that we have today, and say, how do we have consistent operational approaches where we all benefit from the best way of doing things, and we are interoperable by default, rather than having sort of designed that in through information sharing afterwards. Thank you very much for listening to this talk. I'm conscious that I've run through a framework quite fast. I have therefore put some resources up on my website for you if you want, and there is the QR code. Before I finish, and I'm being asked to finish, I'm 4 seconds over. Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody in Jersey who's had to deal with these physical emergencies, from whom we have been able to learn. A big thank you to my team for being willing to look at these approaches and being willing to learn with me. And finally, just to remember those who actually are impacted by these large-scale physical and cyber emergencies. As we've seen here, sometimes it can indeed be life and death. Thank you very much.
So we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Thanks, Matt, for sharing these lessons. But 2 or 3 questions. Please use the microphones. They are distributed across the room. Any questions? If not, then I have one.
Or if you just want to throw something, that's fine too.
I have one. Lessons learned, you mentioned they are essential for learning. What are the difference, or what's special running lessons learned with cyber and non-cyber people?
Yeah, we've done a few of these lessons learned exercises for different issues. So some of them have been for a cyber issue where we've brought others in. Yeah, others have been in these sorts of contexts, and gosh, you end up with hundreds of recommendations. I think the really interesting thing, the first thing that I learned when we started doing this is we built out an emergency communications protocol, incident management protocols within JCSC. And then we've gone and communicated these, and we've done instant response exercises to try and get people to understand them and help them understand them and help them use them. And when we brought in that wider community, it became clear quite quickly that that wasn't sufficient. So actually what we've done this year is we've pivoted, and we've gone to our emergency planning teams and others and said, well, let's build these protocols together. Let's build them together. Let's own them as a community. So as an emergency response community aligned with these sorts of principles, let's ask ourselves, what should that emergency plan be there? And we've ended up with a very different document. Now, it does the same things for us. The difference is the buy-in and support that we will get because we have that engagement across that wider community and the ability to operate together effectively. And that's been really interesting. It does make it more challenging. It's always easier to challenge yourself, privately within your own world, within your own community. It is much harder, I think, and actually really hard very often if you're running an emergency response function, outside of cyber, to really stand up and say, actually, I'm going to let everybody look at this. But people are really good at it, yeah. Aviation is really good at it, standing up and saying, what can we learn? Emergency services, the level of honesty in the reports that I've just mentioned, if you go in and have a look, it's really quite remarkable, and I think we would struggle to replicate that.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Someone else?
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Coming from the island of Bermuda, you understand that we stand up and test our emergency response plan for every hurricane season. And having been able to respond very well from a physical point from all of our hurricane preparation, and now beginning to add that into our emergency response plan for hurricanes, is that an idea that we can expand on in order to make that interoperability so much better? Bermuda recovers after a Cat 5 hurricane in 3 days, being who we are. So you understand our capabilities. How do we begin to add that interoperability when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Obviously, the sorts of issues that we deal with in a small island in Europe are different to what some small islands elsewhere deal with. Much more extreme weather, much more of the time. Now, I'm not asking for more extreme weather more of the time, but the nice thing, as you point out about that, is the benefit to learn from that. So what you will have there is you will have teams who are incredibly practiced, who really understand how to deliver this on a daily basis, and really understand how that response works. But my guess is, generally, you will be no more integrated in that than we were. Yeah, and therefore, by integrating into that, by being part of that response, by seeing that response and learning from it, you're actually learning from the best. The people who have the stress of saying this isn't about a computer, this isn't about financial assets, this is about life and death and welfare and really complex humanitarian issues. they're the best incident response. I mean, many people here are really great, but they're the best. So I think you can learn from that, but you could also look to bring some of that expertise into your CSIRT. These are people who have an immense amount of knowledge. I mean, I've learned an incredible amount from people like our chief of police, the head of our ambulance service, the head of our fire service in how to do this. It's been incredibly valuable. You can bring those people into that cyber environment, and I have found that even if we're talking about a cyber incident, and that's not normally their cup of tea, they are very, very willing to do so. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please remember to submit your feedback on the app. Thank you very much.
I think you have one more.
Sorry for that.
Okay. Good morning. So, quick question. What type of challenges will you find with interoperability with so many teams at play when there's territorial marks on operations? For example, if you're working with the police, armed forces, emergency response, as well as a CERT, who coordinates this? Who owns this so that there's smooth interoperability across teams?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And one of the interesting things is the difference between command and coordination. Command is, I can tell everybody what to do. I'm going to get up, I'm going to issue an instruction, you are going to do it. For anyone else who's been given you have unlimited budget, use all the corporate resources and go and do whatever you need, sounds really good for the first 30 seconds, then it sucks, but it's clear. When you're in this sort of environment, you can't work on a command basis, so it has to be coordinated. So the structure that we've got is a strategic coordination group. That's that top level. They think about what's the big picture, where are we going, and then you have levels below that. So you have, for example, tactical working group, which often can have a much larger number of people on. And then the slide I had at the beginning with the cyber technical advice cell, that's bringing that cyber expertise, but also flowing it up through that structures. And part of that goes to the documentation saying, fine, are our agendas working in the same way? Is our documentation the same way? Do we understand the briefings? Are the briefings consistent? Are they answering all the right questions? And this is where we've got real value from JCSC.
So we have to close. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Please submit the feedback and a warm applause to Matt.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.